Martinez knelt beside the soil sample container, carefully sealing the last specimen of the day. The red sun of Prime hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the research outpost. He had been working on this planet for 6 months now, studying the local megafauna for the Joint Species Research Program. The work was peaceful, methodical, and exactly what he needed after leaving his old life behind. The ground trembled beneath his feet, looked up sharply. That was not the usual seismic activity. Something large was moving through the compound. 4 massive figures emerged from behind the main research building. Each one stood nearly 3 meters tall, their muscled frames covered in dark scales that gleamed like polished stone. Their eyes glowed amber in the fatting light. These were not the scientists usually worked with. These were warriors, and they wore the ceremonial armor of the hunter caste. Commander led the group. His scales bore the scars of countless battles, and his presence made the air feel heavy. He stopped 3 meters from and tilted his head in what passed for a greeting. "Human Martinez," said. His voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Your people have been granted an honor. The Council of Apex has approved humanity for the proving." Stood slowly, brushing dirt from his hands. He had heard whispers about the proving during his time on Prime. It was an ancient tradition, shrouded in secrecy and ritual. Most species considered it a myth. "I don't understand," said carefully. "What does this involve?" "A test of worth," replied. "For generations, we have stood as the apex predators of known space. We hunt the most dangerous beasts. We conquer the harshest worlds. We determine which species earn respect and which remain as prey." The other 3 moved to flank their commander. Noticed they carried no visible weapons, but their claws could tear through steel. He kept his expression neutral, but his heart rate picked up. Years of military training whispered warnings in the back of his mind. "The proving is simple," continued. "One of your kind enters our sacred hunting preserve. You survive for 3 planetary rotations while we hunt you. If you succeed, humanity earns classification as warriorkin. If you fail, humanity remains classified as a lesser species, subject to our guidance and protection." His mouth went dry. "And if I refuse?" "Then humanity has already failed. The choice itself is part of the test." A cold weight settled in his chest. This was not just about him. This was about every human in the galaxy. Their trade agreements, their diplomatic standing, their future relationships with dozens of species, all of it could change based on what happened in the next 72 hours. "What equipment am I allowed?" asked. Gestured, and one of the others stepped forward. The warrior carried a small pack and a rifle. He dropped them at his feet. 30 rounds of ammunition," said. 1 blade, standard field rations for 5 days, water purification system, basic medical supplies. We are not cruel. We give you tools appropriate for a warrior's trial." Picked up the rifle. It was a standard kinetic weapon, reliable but not powerful enough to stop at full charge. The blade was military grade, about 30 centimeters long. He checked the ammunition cartridge. 30 rounds exactly. "Most species receive nothing," added. His tone suggested this was meant as encouragement. "We give you these because humans show promise. You come from a harsh world. You have survived your own internal conflicts. You build tools and adapt to challenges. These traits interest us." "What kind of creatures are in this preserve?" asked. "The kind that make even cautious. The preserve contains specimens from 15 death worlds, including several from Earth's prehistoric periods. We maintain it as a training ground for our young hunters. It teaches respect for nature's fury." Looked at the rifle again. 30 rounds against an entire preserve full of apex predators. Against 4 hunters who could probably track him by scent alone. Against 3 days of constant pursuit with minimal rest. The numbers were not in his favor. But he thought about Hayes, his research partner, who was probably watching this conversation from the observation deck. He thought about the human colony on station, just beginning to establish real trade with alien species. He thought about his little nephew back on Earth, growing up in a galaxy where humanity might be seen as weak, as prey, as something to be protected rather than respected. "When does the trial begin?" asked. His eyes brightened with what might have been approval. "Now." The moved with frightening speed. Before could react, they had attached a tracking beacon to his wrist and loaded him into a transport vehicle. The ride lasted 20 minutes, taking them far from the research outpost into wild territory. Watched through the window as civilization fell away, replaced by dense jungle and rocky cliffs. The preserve entrance looked like the mouth of a cave, but as they descended, realized it was actually a massive crater, kilometers wide and impossibly deep. The walls were lined with luminescent plants that cast an eerie blue glow. Strange sounds echoed from below, howls and roars that made his skin crawl. The transport stopped at a platform halfway down the crater wall, opened the door and gestured for to exit. 3 rotations, the commander said. Survive and you may leave through the northern gate. We will track you. We will hunt you. We will test your limits. Show us what humans are capable of. Shouldered the pack and checked his rifle one more time. He stepped onto the platform and looked down into the preserve. The bottom was shrouded in mist, hiding whatever waited below. One more thing, called out. In 300 years of the proving, 47 species have attempted the trial. 47 have failed. Do not disappoint us, human. We have high hopes for your kind. The platform began to descend, gripped the rifle as he sank into the blue-lit darkness. When the platform reached the bottom, it retracted immediately, leaving him alone in the mist. He took a deep breath and activated his helmet light. The beam cut through the fog, revealing twisted trees and strange rock formations. Somewhere in the distance, something large moved through the undergrowth. Started walking, his boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. He had survived worse than this. He had been a Marine before becoming a scientist. He knew how to track, how to hide, how to fight when necessary, but this was different. This was not about winning a battle. This was about proving humanity's worth to creatures who saw them as potential prey. He moved carefully, staying alert, conserving energy. After 10 minutes of walking, his boot caught on something hard. He looked down and felt his blood run cold. A human skull grinned up at him from the undergrowth, half buried in moss and dirt. Near it lay the remains of field equipment corroded by time and weather. Knelt and examined the gear. Standard issue, maybe 10 years old. This had been another human, another test that was never reported. Stood slowly and scanned the jungle around him. In the distance, he heard the distinct sound of hunters beginning their pursuit. Their howls echoed through the preserve, a sound designed to strike fear into prey. But was not prey. He was human, and humans had their own way of dealing with Apex moved through the jungle with deliberate care. Every step was calculated, every sound analyzed. The blue glow from the luminescent plants provided enough light to see, but it also created shadows that played tricks on the eyes. He had been walking for 2 hours, putting distance between himself and the entry platform. The preserve was massive. From what he could see, it stretched in all directions, a carefully maintained ecosystem designed to challenge even the recognized some of the plant species from his research. Others were completely alien, their leaves and branches formed in ways that seemed to defy normal biology. A roar split the air, close enough to make freeze. He dropped to a crouch behind a fallen log and waited. The sound came again, deeper this time, reverberating through his chest. Something large was moving through the jungle about 50 meters to his left. Slowly raised his head and peered over the log. Through the blue-tinted darkness, he saw a creature that made his breath catch. It stood 4 meters tall at the shoulder, with 6 legs and a body covered in chitinous armor. Its head featured multiple eyes that glowed red in the darkness. 2 massive tusks curved forward from its jaw, each one as long as was tall. The creature had not seen him yet. It was feeding on something, tearing chunks of meat from a carcass could not fully see. The sounds it made while eating were wet and violent. Remained perfectly still. His hand rested on the rifle, but he did not draw it. 30 rounds. He had to think of them as his last resort, not his first option. Every shot he fired would alert to his location. Every shot wasted was a chance lost later when he might truly need it. The creature finished its meal and moved on, crashing through the undergrowth with enough force to shake the ground. Waited 5 full minutes after the sound faded before moving again. He continued deeper into the preserve, his mind working through the tactical situation. They expected him to run. They expected him to panic, to waste ammunition on every threat, to exhaust himself trying to escape. That was how prey behaved. But had spent 8 years as a Marine before choosing science. He had learned to track enemy movements in hostile territory. He had learned to think several steps ahead. Most importantly, he had learned that the best way to survive a superior force was not to fight them directly. After another hour of careful movement, found what he was looking for. A rocky outcropping rose from the jungle floor, creating a natural vantage point. He climbed carefully, testing each handhold until he reached a ledge about 10 meters up. From here, he could see a significant portion of the surrounding jungle. Unslung his pack and took inventory. The rations would last 5 days if he was careful. The water purification system would work as long as he could find water sources. The medical supplies were basic but sufficient. He also found a small data pad tucked into a side pocket, probably left there by the... It displayed a map of the preserve with his tracking beacon marked as a red dot. Interesting, they were not hiding the fact they could track him. This confirmed what it suspected. They were not just hunting him, they were testing him. They wanted to see how he adapted, how he planned, how he dealt with impossible odds. Studied the map carefully. The preserve had several distinct zones. The jungle where he currently stood was labeled as Zone 1. Beyond it lay Zone 2, which appeared to be a desert region. Zone 3 showed what looked like a frozen tundra. Zone 4 was marked simply as restricted. The northern gate, his exit point if he survived, sat at the edge of Zone 3. He would have to cross 2 entire ecosystems while being hunted. The distance was roughly 40 kilometers. A sound made look up sharply. It was different from the creature noises. This was more controlled, more purposeful. He peered over the edge of the outcropping and felt his heart sink. 4 moved through the jungle below, spreading out in a classic hunting formation. They moved with predatory grace, their heads sweeping back and forth as they tracked. Commander led the group, his larger form easy to identify even in the blue darkness. They were moving directly toward his position. His mind raced, the tracking beacon. Of course, they knew exactly where he was. This entire preserve was designed to make escape nearly impossible. Even if he survived the wildlife, he could never outrun hunters who always knew his location. But knowing they could track him was different from knowing what he was doing. Made a decision. He pulled out the blade and carefully, quietly, began prying at the tracking beacon on his wrist. The device was designed to be tamper-proof, but it was not designed for someone with his level of determination. It took 20 minutes of careful work, but he finally managed to remove it. He examined the beacon carefully, then looked down at the jungle floor. They were circling his position now, about 30 meters away and closing. Tied the beacon to a large rock using cord from his pack. He waited until they were directly below his position, then threw the rock as hard as he could in the opposite direction. It sailed through the air and landed with a crash about 60 meters away. The effect was immediate. They turned as one and sprinted toward the sound. They moved with incredible speed, disappearing into the jungle within seconds. Did not waste time. He climbed down from the outcropping using a different route and moved perpendicular to the path. He covered ground quickly but carefully, leaving as little trail as possible. His marine training came back like muscle memory. Step on rocks when possible. Avoid breaking branches. Use water to mask scent when crossing streams. After an hour of steady movement, paused to rest beside a small creek. He filled his water containers and allowed himself to think. They would discover the trick quickly. They would realize he had removed the beacon. That would change the game. They would have to actually hunt him now, using skill rather than technology. Good, preferred it that way. He heard a sound from across the creek and spun, bringing up the rifle. A pair of yellow eyes stared at him from the darkness. The creature was low to the ground, about the size of a large dog but with 6 legs and a tail that ended in what looked like a blade. It watched with obvious intelligence. Kept the rifle trained on it but did not fire. The creature tilted its head, studying him. After a long moment, it turned and disappeared into the undergrowth without attacking. Interesting, not everything in the preserve was immediately hostile, filed that information away. He was after all. Understanding behavior was part of his job. He moved on, continuing to put distance between himself and the... As he walked, he noticed signs of the preserve's artificial nature. Some of the trees grew in perfect geometric patterns. Certain areas of jungle seemed carefully maintained rather than wild. They had created this place, which meant they controlled it. But control had limits. Nature was chaotic even when contained, could use that chaos. Dawn broke slowly, the blue luminescence fading as actual sunlight filtered down through the crater walls high above. Found a dense thicket and crawled inside to rest. He had been moving for 8 hours straight. His body needed sleep, even if it was brief. As he settled in, his mind wandered to the skull he had found. Another human who had attempted the trial, someone who had failed. He wondered how many others there had been. Had said 47 species had tried. How many had been human? The thought made angry, not at the exactly, but at the situation. Humanity was being tested by standards they had never agreed to. Their worth was being measured by their ability to survive a trial designed by apex predators who valued strength above all else. But humans were not apex predators. They were something else. They were persistence hunters. They were problem solvers. They were creatures who survived by adapting, by cooperating, by using their minds when their bodies were not enough. Closed his eyes and forced himself to sleep. He would need his strength. They were still hunting, and they would not stop until the 3 days were finished. When he woke 4 hours later, the jungle had changed. The sounds were different, more active. Creatures moved through the canopy above, calling to each other in strange languages, checked his supplies, and prepared to move again. That was when he heard it, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The jungle sprinted through the jungle, his boots pounding against the soft earth. Behind him, the massive creature crashed through the trees with terrifying speed. Branches snapped like gunshots. The ground shook with each impact of its weight. He did not look back. Looking back would cost him precious seconds. Instead, focused on the terrain ahead, searching for anything that could give him an advantage. A cliff, a cave, a river, anything to break line of sight. The jungle began to thin, burst through a wall of vines, and found himself at the edge of a ravine. The gap was about 4 meters wide, with a steep drop into darkness below. On the other side, the jungle continued. Behind him, the creature was seconds away. Did not hesitate. He ran full speed toward the edge and jumped. For a moment, he was airborne. Wind rushed past his face. The far edge seemed impossibly distant. Then his hands hit solid ground and he rolled, momentum carrying him forward into the safety of the trees on the other side. The creature reached the edge and stopped. It was too large to make the jump. It paced back and forth, growling in frustration, then finally turned away to find easier prey. Lay on the ground for a moment, catching his breath. His heart hammered in his chest. That had been close, too close. He had been lucky that the ravine was there. Luck was not something he could count on in this place. He stood and checked himself for injuries. A few scrapes and bruises, nothing serious. The rifle was still strapped to his back. The blade was secure at his hip. He was running low on luck, but not on determination. Continued moving, now more cautious than before. The jungle gradually gave way to rocky terrain. The blue luminescent plants disappeared, replaced by strange red vegetation that grew from cracks in the stone. The temperature rose steadily as he walked. After 2 hours, reached the edge of Zone 2. The jungle ended abruptly at a line of massive rocks. Beyond them stretched a desert that seemed to shimmer in the heat. The sand was black, and strange formations rose from the ground like twisted sculptures. This was the section marked as desert on the map. Knew that crossing open ground would make him vulnerable, but going around would add hours to his journey. He studied the desert carefully, looking for any sign of movement or threat. The sand appeared empty, but had learned not to trust appearances in this preserve. He picked up a rock and threw it into the desert. It landed with a soft thump. Nothing emerged. No creatures rushed toward the sound. Made his decision. He would cross at night when the temperature dropped and his heat signature would be less obvious to any hunters. For now, he needed to rest and conserve energy. He found a small cave in the rocks at the jungle's edge and crawled inside. The space was barely large enough for him to sit up, but it offered protection from view, ate one of his ration bars, and took careful sips from his water container. He was already a third of the way through his water supply. The purification system would help, but he needed to find water sources soon. As he rested, thought about they would have found the tracking beacon by now. They would know he had intentionally removed it. What would that tell them about him? That he was clever, that he understood their hunting methods. Or would they simply see it as proof that humans were tricky and untrustworthy? Smiled despite himself. Let them think what they wanted. He was not here to make the like him. He was here to prove that humanity could not be dismissed as prey. He dozed lightly for several hours, waking periodically to check his surroundings. Each time, the cave remained empty and the desert beyond showed no signs of activity. When the sun finally began to set, prepared to move. The desert at night was different. The black sand seemed to absorb what little light reached it. Strange sounds echoed across the empty spaces, whistles and clicks that seemed to come from beneath the ground. Moved carefully, testing each step before putting his full weight down. About an hour into the crossing, he heard something that made him freeze. Voices, speaking in the rumbling, guttural language of the dropped flat against the sand and looked around. About 200 meters to his left, he saw them. Two hunters moving in parallel with his path. They were not looking directly at him, but they were definitely searching the area. Remained motionless. Without the tracking beacon, they had to rely on traditional hunting methods. That meant they were looking for tracks, for disturbances in the environment, for any sign of his passage. He watched them carefully, studying their movements. They were spreading out, creating a search grid. This was methodical, professional hunting. They were not relying on superior strength. They were using intelligence and coordination. It reminded of something from his military days, a lesson his sergeant had taught him during survival training. The best predators did not chase their prey endlessly. They studied patterns. They predicted movements. They positioned themselves where the prey would eventually have to go. Realized what they were doing. They knew he had to cross the desert to reach the northern gate. There were only so many routes through Zone 2 that offered any kind of cover or water. They were watching those routes, waiting for him to reveal himself. He needed to change his approach. Slowly, carefully, began crawling backward, away from the hunters. He moved inches at a time, barely disturbing the sand. It took almost an hour to put 100 meters between himself and the hunters. When he felt safe enough to stand, changed direction entirely. Instead of heading directly north, he angled west, toward the area marked on the map as Zone 4. The restricted zone, the place even the seemed to avoid. If it was dangerous enough to scare the apex predators, maybe he could use that to his advantage. The desert began to change as he walked. The black sand gave way to harder ground, crusted with salt or some other mineral. Strange rock formations rose higher and more frequently. Some of them seemed almost architectural, like ruins of an ancient civilization. Paused at one of these formations and examined it closely. The surface was covered in markings that might have been writing or just natural erosion. He touched the stone and felt a faint vibration running through it, like electricity or some kind of energy field. This place was definitely artificial. They had not just collected dangerous creatures. They had created entire environments, ecosystems that existed nowhere else in nature. Wondered what the purpose was, training had said. But training for what? A sound made him turn. Something was approaching from the direction he had come. Not the something else. Something that moved low to the ground and made a strange clicking noise. Drew his blade and pressed his back against the rock formation. The clicking grew louder. Then he saw them. 6 creatures, each about the size of a large dog with bodies that seemed to be part insect and part reptile. They moved in perfect coordination, spreading out as they approached. Pack hunters. Options flashed through his mind. He could shoot them, but that would alert them to his location. He could try to outrun them, but pack hunters were built for endurance. He could stand and fight with the blade, but 6 against 1 was not good odds. Then he remembered the creature by the creek. The one that had watched him and then left without attacking. Not everything in the preserve was programmed to kill on sight. Some creatures could be deterred. Stood tall and made himself as large as possible. He raised the blade and shouted, a deep, aggressive sound that echoed off the rock formations. The pack creatures stopped, confused by the display. Shouted again, this time adding a clicking noise he made by hitting the blade against the rock. The creatures exchanged glances, their alien body language uncertain. Took a step forward, still making noise, still appearing as large and threatening as possible. One of the creatures backed up, then another. Within seconds, the entire pack had turned and scattered into the darkness. Allowed himself a breath of relief. Intimidation worked. Even here, in a preserve designed to kill, basic animal behavior still applied. Most creatures did not want to fight unless they were sure they could win. He continued west, moving more confidently now. The night was half over and he had covered significant ground. Zone 4 loomed ahead, a region of twisted rock and strange energy signatures. The map showed no clear paths through it, just warnings in symbols could not read. As dawn approached, found shelter in a cave that went deep into a hillside. Inside, the temperature was cool and stable. He could hear water dripping somewhere in the darkness. That was good. He would need to refill his containers. Settled in to rest and realized something important. He had been in the preserve for over 24 hours. He had used 0 rounds of ammunition. He had survived attacks from multiple creatures. He had evaded hunters who knew this terrain better than he ever could. And he was beginning to understand the real test. They did not just want to see if humans could fight. They wanted to see if humans could adapt. They wanted to see if humans could think their way through impossible situations. They wanted to see if humans panicked when faced with superior force or if they found alternative solutions. Had spent his entire military career learning that direct confrontation was a last resort. Marines were taught to be smart, not just strong. Use the terrain, use psychology, conserve resources, strike only when victory was certain. There were apex predators, but humans had evolved differently. Humans were persistent. Humans woke to the sound of rumbling. The cave walls trembled around him, dust falling from the ceiling. He grabbed his rifle and moved to the cave entrance carefully. Outside, the sky had darkened to an angry red color. Storm clouds rolled across the preserve and lightning flashed in the distance. But it was not the storm that made blood run cold. It was what stood in the valley below. A creature of impossible size dominated the landscape. It stood at least 20 meters tall, with a body that seemed to be made of living stone. Multiple heads swayed on long necks, each one searching the area with glowing eyes. They called it the Devourer, according to the data Pat had studied. It was the preserve's ultimate predator, kept in the deepest sections and rarely released. The creature was surrounded by smaller animals, a herd of something that looked like deer but with crystalline antlers. The Devourer was herding them, driving them toward the rocky hills where it had taken shelter. Quickly assessed the situation. The herd was running directly toward his cave. Behind them came the Devourer, moving with surprising speed for something so large. If stayed in the cave, he would be trapped. If he ran, he would be exposed to both the creature and any hunters in the area. He made his decision fast, grabbed his pack and moved out of the cave, circling around to higher ground. The herd passed below him seconds later, their hooves thundering against stone. The Devourer followed, its massive feet shaking the ground with each step. From his vantage point, watched the scene unfold. The herd scattered as it reached the rocky terrain, splitting into smaller groups. But some of them, the young ones and a few injured adults, were not fast enough. They clustered together in a dead-end canyon, trapped by the rocks. The Devourer approached slowly, taking its time. This was not about food. This was about the hunt, about cornering prey and savoring the victory. Should have moved on, this was not his fight. These creatures were part of the preserve's ecosystem, and nature was cruel. The strong survived and the weak perished. That was the way of things. But as watched the terrified herd huddled together, something in him refused to accept it. He thought about why he had left the Marines. He had grown tired of violence. He had grown tired of watching innocent beings suffer because they were caught in situations beyond their control. He had chosen to become a scientist to preserve life, not to destroy it. These creatures were innocent. They were trapped in a preserve designed by to create danger. They had no choice in their fate. Checked his ammunition. 30 rounds still full. He had promised himself to use them sparingly to save them for when he truly needed them. But what was need? Saving his own life, or standing between predators and prey when he had the power to make a difference? He thought about what they were testing. They wanted to see how humans responded to impossible situations. They wanted to see what humanity valued. They wanted to understand what made humans different from other species. Made his choice. He moved down from the high ground toward the canyon. The Devourer had not noticed him yet. It was focused entirely on the trapped herd, savoring their fear. Positioned himself behind a large boulder at the canyon entrance and raised his rifle. The first shot hit the Devourer's leftmost head, striking it just below the eye. The creature roared in surprise and pain, jerking back. Fired again, this time at the creature's leg joint. The shot was precise, hitting the gap in the stone-like armor. The Devourer turned toward, all its heads focusing on this new threat. It took a step forward, shaking the ground. Stood his ground and fired 3 more times in quick succession, each shot aimed at vulnerable points he had identified. The creature hesitated. It was not used to prey that fought back. It was not used to pain. Could see the calculation happening behind those glowing eyes. Was this small thing worth the trouble? Gave it more reason to doubt. He pulled a flare from his emergency kit and lit it, waving the bright red flame above his head. The light and smoke disoriented the Devourer further. Behind it, the trapped herd sensed their chance. They bolted from the canyon, running past the confused creature in a desperate rush for freedom. The Devourer roared again, angry at losing its prey. It turned back toward, but he was already moving. He threw the flare at the creature's face and ran toward a narrow passage between two rock formations. The passage was barely wide enough for him to fit through. The devourer was far too large. The creature tried to follow but got stuck. Its heads whipped around in frustration, trying to reach through the gap. Kept moving, putting more distance between himself and the enraged predator. Behind him, he heard the devourer giving up and turning away to find easier prey. Stopped to catch his breath. He checked his ammunition. He had used 7 rounds to save a herd of creatures that would probably be hunted by something else tomorrow. 7 rounds that might be the difference between life and death when the final confrontation came. But he did not regret it, not for a second. A slow clap echoed through the rocks. Spun, raising his rifle. Commander stood on a boulder 10 meters away, his amber eyes gleaming with something that might have been respect. "Interesting choice, human," the said. His voice carried no threat, only curiosity. "You used precious ammunition to save creatures you do not know, creatures that provide you no benefit." Kept the rifle trained on him, but did not fire. They were innocent. "Innocent," repeated the word as if testing its taste. "We do not have an exact translation for that concept in our language. Prey is prey, predators hunt, the strong survive. These are the laws of nature." "Then maybe the laws need updating," said. Tilted his head. "You could have let the devourer kill them. You could have used the distraction to escape. You could have saved your ammunition for the final day when the real challenges begin. Instead, you chose mercy. I chose to protect those who could not protect themselves. And if that choice costs you your life, if you face a threat tomorrow and you are 3 bullets short of survival, will you think this was worth it?" Lowered the rifle slightly. "If I survive by letting innocents die when I could have helped, what exactly would I be surviving for?" There was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the storm continued to build, thunder rolling through the preserve. Finally, spoke again. "You are not what I expected, Martinez. When I studied human military history, I saw warriors who conquered, who dominated, who fought with ferocity. I expected you to use your weapons to establish dominance, to prove human strength through violence." "Humans are capable of violence," admitted. "But that is not what makes us strong. We are strong because we choose when to fight and when to protect. We are strong because we can look at a situation and ask not just how to survive, but what kind of beings we want to be." Jumped down from the boulder, landing with barely a sound despite his size. He approached slowly, his movements non-threatening. When he was close enough, he reached out and placed a massive clawed hand on shoulder. "The trial is not yet finished. You have 1 more day. The preserve's most dangerous zone lies ahead, creatures that make the devourer seem tame, terrain that will test every skill you possess." He paused. "But I will tell you something that is not in the rules. The trial is not just about survival. It is about showing us who you are. And you, Martinez, have shown me more in 2 days than most species show in their entire attempt." The removed his hand and stepped back. "I will continue to hunt you. That is my duty. But know that you have already earned something many species never earn. You have earned my respect." With that, turned and disappeared into the rocks, moving with the silence of a true predator. Stood alone, processing what had just happened. The commander of the hunt had spoken to him not as prey, but as an equal. That changed things. Maybe not the outcome of the trial, but definitely its meaning. He checked his ammunition again. 23 rounds remaining. He thought about what it said. The most dangerous zone was ahead. 1 more day, 23 rounds, and a blade of resolve. It would have to be enough. Started moving again, heading deeper into Zone 4. The landscape grew stranger with each kilometer. The rock formations became more elaborate, almost like buildings or monuments. Strange symbols were carved into surfaces everywhere. Energy fields shimmered in the air, creating barriers and paths that normal physics. This was the heart of the preserve, the place where they tested their best warriors, had committed to this path, and there was no going back now. As night fell on the 2nd day, found shelter in what looked like an ancient structure built into a cliff face. Inside, the walls were covered in murals depicting hunts and battles. He studied them carefully, learning from the images. They valued courage, yes, but also strategy. They honored those who thought as well as fought. Ate his rations and prepared for the final day. Somewhere out there, they were watching. Somewhere out there, the path to the northern gate waited, and somewhere out there, his final test was preparing to begin. He closed his eyes and thought about home. About Earth, that harsh world that had forged humanity through ice ages and disasters. About the persistence that had carried humans from caves to starships. About the compassion that made humans choose to protect rather than dominate. The third day began with silence. Woke before dawn in the ancient structure, his body aching from 2 days of constant movement. He ate the last of his rations and filled his water containers from a stream that ran through the ruins. According to the data pad, he was now deep in Zone 4, less than 10 kilometers from the northern gate. 10 kilometers. In normal terrain, that would be a few hours of walking. In this preserve, it might as well be 100. Studied the map one more time. The route to the gate passed through an area marked with symbols he could not translate. Whatever lay ahead was considered significant enough to warrant special designation. He shouldered his pack and began moving. The ruins grew denser as he walked. Entire buildings emerged from the rock, their architecture unlike anything had seen before. Some were clearly, but others were older, built by civilizations that had existed before the preserve. Wondered if they had discovered these structures or built around them. After an hour of careful navigation through the ruins, heard something that made him stop. It was faint, barely audible over the wind. A voice, human. Moved toward the sound, every sense alert for traps. The voice came from below, from a cave system that descended into darkness. He activated his helmet light and descended carefully, the rifle ready in his hands. The cave opened into a larger chamber, and there found something he had not expected. A makeshift camp, supplies scattered across the floor, and in the corner a man. The man looked up as entered. He was thin, his hair long and tangled, his clothes torn and dirty. But his eyes were sharp, intelligent. He stared at as if seeing a ghost. "You are real," the man whispered. "Another human, I thought I was dreaming again." Lowered the rifle and approached carefully. "How long have you been here?" 3 years, maybe 4, I lost count. The man laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I am Danny Brooks, engineering specialist. I was on the 3rd scientific expedition to Prime. They gave me the trial. I failed, but I survived." Knelt beside him. "The trial only lasts 3 days. "The trial, yes, but the preserve is forever. The northern gate only opens during active trials. When my 3 days ended, I was still inside. They assumed I had died. They sealed the preserve and left me here." Felt cold anger building in his chest. "You have been trapped here for 3 years. "Trapped, yes, but I adapted. I learned the preserve's patterns. I found safe zones. I made alliances with some of the creatures." Danny gestured to the cave entrance. "There are things in here that will not attack if you show them respect. They do not understand that. They only see predator and prey." "Why did you not try to escape when they opened it for new trials?" "I tried twice. Both times they were waiting. They thought I was a dangerous creature that had somehow entered the preserve. They tried to kill me." Danny touched a long scar on his arm. "After that, I stayed hidden. Better to live here than die trying to escape." Made a decision. "The gate is open now. My trial ends at sunset today. If we move fast, we can both get out." Danny stared at him. "You would risk your trial to help me." "You are human. You are trapped. I am not leaving you here." "But they are watching. If you deviate from the path, if you delay too long, they might fail you for breaking the trial's spirit." "Then they fail me. I am not abandoning you." Danny's eyes filled with tears. He nodded slowly, unable to speak. Helped him gather what few supplies Danny had managed to accumulate. They moved out of the cave together, supporting Danny's weight as they climbed back to the surface. The other man was weak from years of poor nutrition and stress, but his will to survive was strong. They made slow progress through the ruins, kept watch constantly, knowing they would not approve of this deviation. Danny shared what he knew about the preserve's layout, information that proved invaluable as they navigated the dangerous terrain. After 2 hours, they stopped to rest. Danny was breathing hard, his body not used to sustained movement. Gave him water and checked their position. 5 kilometers to the gate. They could make it if they pushed hard. That was when heard the familiar sound of movement. He looked up and saw all 4 hunters emerge from the ruins around them. Commander stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You found the lost human," said. "This complicates things." Stood, placing himself between Danny and "I am taking him with me. The trial is for 1 human to survive, not 2. Then change the rules. You made this trial, you can modify it." Tilted his head. And if I refuse, if I say you must leave him to complete your trial? His hand moved to his rifle. 23 rounds, 4 hunters, not good odds, but he had faced worse. Then I fail. But I fail knowing I chose to protect someone who needed help. That is worth more than passing a test. The other moved to flank their commander, ready for combat. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Kept his hand on the rifle but did not draw it. Starting a fight would doom them both. Studied for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He laughed. It was a deep, rumbling sound that echoed through the ruins. You continue to surprise me, human. Every time I think I understand you, you reveal new depths. Gestured to the other hunters, and they relaxed their stance. Your trial was to survive 3 days while we hunted you. You have done this. The trial says nothing about saving others. In fact, it makes your survival more impressive. So we can both leave? Asked cautiously. You can both leave, but understand something, Martinez. You have used 7 rounds of ammunition. You have removed your tracking beacon. You have avoided direct confrontation. You have protected creatures weaker than yourself. And now you risk everything to save a human you did not even know existed. Stepped closer. This is not the behavior of prey. This is not even the behavior of a predator. This is something else entirely. This is the behavior of a human, said simply. Nodded slowly. Yes, and that is what makes your species dangerous. Not your weapons, not your world, not even your intelligence. It is your refusal to be what others expect. It is your ability to look at impossible situations and choose compassion over survival instinct. The commander turned to his hunters. The trial is concluded. The human has passed, more than passed. He has shown us something we needed to see. One of the others spoke up. But Commander, he did not hunt. He did not prove strength. He proved something more valuable than strength. He proved character. Looked back at. We are apex predators. We have conquered death worlds. We have built an empire on the principle that the strong should lead. But we have also become stagnant. We test other species by our standards and find them wanting. Perhaps the problem is not with them, but with our standards. Supported Danny as they began walking again. They fell into step beside them, no longer hunters but escorts. They moved through the last section of Zone 4 together, an unlikely group bound by mutual respect. As they approached the northern gate, saw it for the first time. A massive structure built into the crater wall, covered in symbols and glowing with energy. The gate was opening, bright light spilling through from the world beyond. Hayes stood waiting on the other side. When she saw him merge with Danny, her face showed pure relief and joy. She ran forward and embraced them both, tears streaming down her face. I watched every moment, she said. The whole research station watched. When you removed the tracking beacon, we thought you were lost. When you saved those creatures from the Devourer, we did not understand. But now I see it. You were not just surviving, you were showing them who we are. Looked back at Commander. The warrior stood at the gate's threshold, his amber eyes reflecting the light. He raised one massive hand in what might have been a salute. Your species has earned warriorkin status, called out. But more than that, you have earned a place as strategic partners. The galaxy needs more than apex predators. It needs apex cooperators, those who can turn enemies into allies, those who protect rather than dominate. What happens to the trial now? Asked. It ends. 300 years of tradition concluded. We will find new ways to evaluate species. Better ways. Ways that measure character as well as strength. Paused. You came here with 30 rounds and a blade. You leave having used barely any of them. That alone tells a story worth sharing. The gate began to close. Watched the preserve disappear behind massive doors, taking with it the memories of 3 days that had changed everything. He looked down at the rifle in his hands. 23 rounds remaining. A blade still sharp at his hip. Danny leaned against him, exhausted but free. Stood on his other side, her hand on his shoulder. Around them, human and alien researchers gathered, all watching, all understanding that something significant had happened. Thought about the skull he had found on the first day, another human who had tried and failed. But that failure had not been about weakness. It had been about a test designed with the wrong criteria. A test that measured only survival, not purpose. Humans were not apex predators. They were something evolution had crafted differently. They were creatures who survived by adapting, by cooperating, by making moral choices even in impossible situations. They were creatures who looked at a universe of violence and chose to build bridges instead of weapons. They had given 30 rounds and a blade, expecting him to use them to prove strength. Instead, he had used 7 rounds to protect innocents and 0 rounds against themselves. He had proven that humanity's greatest weapon was not violence, but resolve. The resolve to remain human even when tested by apex predators. As the group walked away from the gate, back toward the research station, felt something he had not expected. Pride, not in himself specifically, but in what humanity represented, in what they could be when they chose character over convenience. Commander had been right about one thing. The galaxy needed more than apex predators. It needed species who understood that true strength was not about dominating others. It was about choosing to protect, to cooperate, to show mercy even when violence was easier. Humanity had passed the trial, but more importantly, they had changed what the trial meant. They had shown the and everyone watching that there were different ways to measure worth, different ways to be strong. Looked at the rifle one last time before storing it away. 23 rounds he had not needed to fire, a blade he had barely used, and yet he had won. Not by being the strongest or the fastest or the most violent, but by being human. That was enough, that would always be enough. The preserve gates sealed shut behind them and never looked back. Ahead lay new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that humanity belonged among the stars, not as conquerors or prey, but as partners, as beings who understood that the apex of evolution was not predation. It was compassion, it was resolve, it was choosing to remain human no matter what the universe threw at them. And that was the greatest weapon of all. They had given him 30 rounds and a blade. But humanity's real weapon had always been resolve, the determination to face impossible odds and emerge not just alive, but better than before. Smiled in the darkness, tomorrow would be the hardest day, but he was ready. Air adaptable, humans survived by being unpredictable. Closed his eyes and smiled. Commander had said he had high hopes for humanity, intended to exceed those hopes. But first, he needed sleep. The second day was about to begin, and he had a feeling things were going to get more interesting. Went suddenly silent, even the insects stopped their noise. Looked up slowly and saw something that made his blood run cold. High in the trees, barely visible among the branches, something massive stirred. It was easily 15 meters long, covered in scales that shifted color to match the foliage. Multiple limbs gripped the tree trunks, and a head the size of a small car turned in his direction. The creature's eyes locked onto. It opened its mouth, revealing rows of teeth, and began to descend. Rand. Tors. He checked his ammunition one more time. 30 rounds and a blade. It would have to be enough. The hunt had begun,